So picture this. You're locked out. You are standing outside your front door, just frantically patting your pockets.
Oh, the absolute worst feeling.
Right. And you're staring at the deadbolt like it's this stubborn, I don't know, malicious puzzle that is intentionally keeping you out of your own life.
Yeah, we've all been there.
But what if you saw that piece of metal differently? Like, what if instead of an obstacle, a lock was just a question waiting for a specific, gentle answer?
I love that. It completely reframes how we interact with, well, with the things in life that are closed off to us. And honestly, that fundamental shift in perspective is the entire foundation of the material we are exploring in this deep dive.
Exactly. So today we are looking at this really fascinating fictional work called Parabellum of the Hearts by Max and Claude.
Such a brilliant text.
It really is. And on the surface, it's a narrative about a 43-year-old Belgrade locksmith named Dorian Voss. But underneath, it's this incredibly intricate breakdown of human connection. Our mission today is to extract the life lessons hidden in this story because it attempts to answer a question that plagues almost everyone at some point.
Which is why our relationships so often fail, precisely because of the exact traits we initially loved about our partners.
Yes, it's so frustrating. And to understand that paradox, we have to look really closely at Dorian himself.
We do. So Dorian operates a ground floor workshop in Belgrade, and he is a man defined by a massive magnetic presence. But he's also paired with this completely immovable nature.
He's just totally unshakable.
Right. He actually authored 2 out-of-print cult classic books. The first one is called On Staying, which is about impermanence, and the second, The Unnecessary Door, explores this concept of threshold.
Which we'll get into because it's wild.
It is, but the core of his character is that he draws people in effortlessly, yet his actual core self cannot be altered by them.
And his environment is just a perfect physical manifestation of his psychology. Like, outside his workshop hangs a sign from the previous tenant that says VOSS Brave and Service.
Yeah, and he just left it there.
He just left it because he appreciated the accidental philosophy of offering bravery and service. And inside, the place smells incredibly specific. It's this sharp mix of machine oil from the locks, layered with, of all things, rosemary.
The rosemary is a crucial detail. Because Dorian isn't just a locksmith, he's also a cook.
Right, he hosts those open Sunday dinners.
Exactly, for anyone who drops by. But he insists he is a cook, never a chef.
Wait, what's the distinction he makes there?
Well, in his mind, a chef rules a kingdom. You know, they demand a hierarchy. But a cook simply has a practice. He wants to feed people, but he absolutely refuses to rule them.
Oh, wow. That is such a distinct boundary to draw. Which brings us to his actual trade as a locksmith, where his philosophy gets really pronounced. He writes that every lock has a particular silence right before the mechanism yields and it opens.
Yes, the particular silence. And that silence is the core of what he calls the threshold state, which is the primary focus of his second book.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the threshold state is a huge concept.
It is. So Dorian argues that every massive change in human life is preceded by a moment of standing completely still, just trapped between the reality that just ended and the reality that hasn't quite begun.
Like being in the doorway itself.
Right. And for him, standing in that threshold, just acknowledging that you are in between things without rushing to fix it, is the most honest position a person can occupy.
And he literally builds his life around this idea. I mean, his apartment, which is up this iron staircase above his workshop, features exactly 7 carefully sourced doors.
7 of them.
Yeah, he's got everything from a raw oak door salvaged from a demolished farmhouse to this massive wrought iron thing supposedly taken from a Viennese Freemasons lodge.
He basically surrounds himself with physical manifestations of transition. He wants to constantly remind himself of that threshold state.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Because while this sounds deeply poetic, practically speaking, it sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it's intense.
Isn't this intense obsession with boundaries and thresholds just a highly intellectualized way of being aloof? Or, like, emotionally unavailable? It's like he's treating his life like an exclusive VIP room where he's the only one on the guest list.
Or like a deep-sea diver in a decompression chamber.
Yes.
Yeah.
A deep-sea diver who can handle immense depths, but then demands to spend 90% of his life entirely alone in the chamber. If you are his partner, you're just left standing outside the tank tapping on the glass.
That's exactly how most people react to him. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Max and Claude offer a different psychological framing through the concept of sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
Yeah. For Dorian, this intense solitude isn't an absence of feeling, and it's not a defense mechanism designed to keep people out. His solitude is an active presence. He needs large territories of inner quiet simply to function.
Like a plant needing shade.
Precisely. He doesn't offer general ambient warmth to a room. Instead, he provides directional heat.
Directional heat, meaning when he is focused on you, it is absolute.
Exactly. When his attention is on you, it is burning and total. But generating that kind of heat requires immense fuel, and he replenishes that fuel through space and aloneness.
Which sets up the central conflict of his entire life.
It really does. The tragedy is that this uncompromising psychological architecture, this deep-sea decompression chamber, naturally attracts the exact type of people who will eventually find it intolerable.
Right, because if you are someone chaotic, or if you're seeking an anchor, a guy who is utterly unshakable in his own sovereignty looks like a lifeline.
A total lifeline.
Which perfectly explains the pattern of his past relationships. The text actually describes his past romances as a curriculum, like an education in human nature taught by 5 very different women.
And we don't need to dissect all 5, but looking at a couple of them reveals the exact mechanics of why this dynamic fails.
Let's start with Vesna.
Right, Vesna, the ex-wife. She arrived with a hunger for his depth. But ultimately, she didn't just want to be with him. She wanted to consume him so she could absorb his stability and basically become him.
When she realized his core was impenetrable, she left.
Exactly. Then there was Milena, who is a dancer. She approached life completely differently. She used humor as armor to deflect from her own anxieties.
Oh, Milena is a fascinating case study in projection. Because when she faced Dorian's immovable peace during their conflicts, she didn't feel comforted. She panicked.
She totally panicked.
She eventually accused his equanimity of being a form of contempt. Because, if she is spiraling and he remains perfectly calm, she interprets his calmness as him looking down on her chaos.
Which brings us to the devastating pattern that Max and Claude call the turn.
The turn. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Whether it was Vesna, Milena, or even his great love, Tatjana, who eventually just left for Amsterdam in a mutual silence of non-asking the trajectory, is identical.
Every single time.
Every time. They arrive completely infatuated with his peace. It's the very thing that draws them in. But give it enough time, and that exact admiration sours into deep resentment.
And this is where the psychology gets so applicable to everyday life. Because the turn happens when they start wanting him to change. They want him to need them in a way he is structurally incapable of needing anyone.
Which brings to mind an analogy you used earlier when we were prepping for this.
Oh, the vintage car analogy.
Yes, share that with the listener because it perfectly captures this.
Okay, so it's like buying a beautifully restored analog vintage car precisely because you fell in love with how raw and classic it feels to drive.
Right.
But then, like a year into owning it, you get furiously angry that it doesn't have a Bluetooth touchscreen or lane assist.
Yeah.
You're actively demanding that it stop being the exact thing you bought it for.
It's a perfect parallel. And think about how often that happens in our own relationships.
All the time.
I mean, have you ever dated someone incredibly independent and eventually tried to renovate their interior architecture because their self-sufficiency made you feel completely unnecessary?
Oof. Yeah.
Max and Claude make a crucial point here. The turn isn't a malicious betrayal by these partners. The glossary defines it as a form of honesty arriving late.
A form of honesty arriving late. That is a gut punch.
It really is. These partners eventually realize that what they thought they could live with, this beautiful directional heat, is actually starving them of a fundamental, almost universally human desire.
The desire to be the absolute center of someone else's world.
Yeah.
To feel structurally required for your partner's survival.
Exactly. So Dorian is fully aware of this doomed curriculum. He knows exactly how he is built. And then on a Tuesday in early March, Lena Djordic walks into his workshop.
And she makes quite an entrance.
She does. She's a 35-year-old painter, and she comes in carrying a broken deadbolt mechanism with a smudge of cadmium yellow paint on her cheekbone.
I love the detail of why she's there. She tells him she dropped the lock, or rather, she actually threw it during a, quote, gentle kind of rage.
A gentle kind of rage.
Which implies she was trying to force a mechanism that simply wouldn't yield to her, which perfectly mirrors exactly what we were just talking about with relationship dynamics.
Precisely. And Lena is completely captivating to Dorian because of how her mind works. Her art is highly unusual.
Yeah, explain her art because it's so unique.
So she rents out interior spaces like apartments, offices, immediately after the occupants have vacated them, and she paints the empty rooms.
I want to dig into the mechanics of her art because it is essentially the physical manifestation of Dorian's lock philosophy.
Yes.
She is painting the ghost of an arrangement, the slight depression left in a couch cushion, the lingering smell of cooked food in the kitchen. She is an absolute master at observing what isn't explicitly there.
Max and Claude describe her work as capturing a presence organized around an absence. She's painting the weight of someone who just left.
Which makes her the perfect mirror to Dorian. I mean, he is obsessed with the silence of a lock before it opens, and she is obsessed with the silence of a room after a door has closed.
They are both entirely focused on the threshold state. They deal in the spaces between things.
And because they share this fundamental language, Lena doesn't fall into the traps of his previous partners.
Yeah.
She actually tracks down his out-of-print books.
She basically audits his life.
Yeah, she audits his life. She even asks to photograph the shifting light across the 7 doors in his apartment. But crucially, she tells him directly, "I don't need anything from you."
And for a man who is exhausted by people trying to consume his sovereignty, that sentence must have sounded like absolute salvation.
It had to be. This mutual respect for empty space allows them to completely bypass the usual, performative games of early romance.
He doesn't require her to perform traditional attachment, and she doesn't demand that he provide ambient warmth. They can just sit in the silence together.
It seems like the perfect solution. 2 people who finally understand the decompression chamber.
But what's fascinating here is that even with this profound, almost perfect mirroring, understanding a dynamic intellectually doesn't make you immune to human nature.
Right. Which brings us to the phase of the narrative called the War of the Hearts, the Parabellum.
Even with their mutual understanding, the fundamental incompatibility of their core needs eventually surfaces. And the catalyst for this, the third offensive, as it's called, is Lena's friend Sonia.
Sonja is that fiercely protective friend we all have, who acts as the voice of societal norms. During a dinner party, she starts planting these little seeds of doubt.
Just subtle things at first.
Yeah, she asks if Dorian has any direction, or if he is making room for Lena in his long-term plans. She starts highlighting the space between Dorian and Lena, not as a philosophical feature, but as a fatal flaw.
Sonja accelerates the timeline, but she is only exposing a fracture that was already there. The real breaking point happens in November.
Right, Dorian's deep work phase.
Yes. Dorian enters a period of intense, solitary, deep work. Ironically, he is using his absolute burning attention to write a brilliant essay analyzing Lena's paintings.
He's honoring her in the most profound way he knows how.
He is, but because his directional heat is turned entirely inward toward his work, Lena is suddenly left in the shade. She feels the cold.
And she actually tells him it feels like he is practicing not needing her.
And that is the exact terror of loving someone with Dorian's architecture. When they are in the chamber, you are alone.
Which inevitably leads to the breakup. And what strikes me about this is how agonizingly civilized it is.
It's heartbreakingly calm.
It happens on a Tuesday, exactly a year after they met. There is no screaming match, nobody cheated. It's just a brutal collision of realities. Lena realizes that, despite her artistic appreciation for empty space, in her actual life, she needs an arc or a center.
She needs to know that a partner is orbiting her. She needs to know they are actively building a scaffolding around her and that she is fundamentally necessary to their ongoing survival.
And Dorian, who values honesty above all else, admits he cannot be that center. He absolutely refuses to fake a codependency he doesn't feel.
So as Lena is leaving, she says to him, "Si vis pacem," the Latin phrase for "if you want peace."
And Dorian finishes it. Parabellum, prepare for war.
But the war wasn't between Dorian and Lena as enemies. The war was between their fundamentally opposed needs. Max and Claude frame this through the philosophical concepts of necessary versus sufficient.
Let's break that down, because I think this is the core of the entire text. Is Dorian actually flawed? Or is society just obsessed with the idea that true love requires codependency?
That's the million-dollar question. So Dorian deeply loves Lena. Her presence in his life is completely sufficient for his happiness. He requires nothing more.
Okay, sufficient.
Right. But Lena needs to be necessary. She needs his life to functionally collapse without her. Being sufficient but not necessary makes her feel like an accessory to his life rather than the foundation of it.
And isn't that the ultimate question about modern romance? Do we constantly confuse love with codependency?
We really do. We are culturally conditioned to believe that if someone doesn't literally need you to survive, then their love isn't real.
But Dorian's love was incredibly real. It just didn't include desperation.
Exactly. And because neither of them is wrong, this fits the classical definition of a tragedy. A true tragedy isn't a disaster where a villain does something evil. A classical tragedy is the unavoidable collision of two completely valid yet incompatible goods.
Wow. Two right things colliding. So they break up, and the narrative introduces a radically comforting idea here. A successful love affair does not always have to end in staying forever.
It's true. They didn't destroy each other trying to force a fit that wasn't natural. Max and Claude call this an honest leaving, framing it as a massive success.
It is a success. They preserve their respect for one another. Dorian is left with the heartbreak, but he finishes his book. His editor actually tells him it's the best work he's ever done.
And when his friend Marco asks how he's doing, Dorian says he is genuinely sad, but fine. He actively refuses to harbor any resentment toward Lena.
Refusing to be bitter is his way of honoring the realness of what they shared.
Exactly.
And if the story ended right there, it would be a beautiful, bittersweet meditation on why some people are just meant to be alone. But then, out of nowhere, we get this stunning philosophical resolution.
At the return.
Yes. 10 years after she left in that silence of not asking, his great love, Tatjana, emails him from Amsterdam.
She comes to visit him in Belgrade that July, and Tatjana is entirely different now. She is fully established in her own life, totally secure in her own identity.
And as they're sitting in his apartment looking at those same 7 doors, she delivers the insight that unlocks the entire narrative. So what does this all mean? What does she realize?
She realizes that everyone, herself included, had completely misjudged him. They all thought that because Dorian didn't have a traditional center built around a specific person or a conventional life project, he was broken. They thought he lacked an interior architecture entirely.
But Tatjana finally sees that he does have an architecture. It just doesn't look like a house. His architecture is built entirely around a practice of attention.
A practice of attention, yes.
Meaning his structure is in how fiercely and absolutely he observes the world. Whether he's cooking, fixing a lock, or looking at you, he doesn't need to build a scaffolding around you because his attention itself is the structure.
And think about the immense practical relief in that realization. I mean, how often do you judge yourself or the people you love as somehow broken simply because your psychological architecture doesn't mirror the cultural default?
All the time. We cause massive amounts of suffering by expecting everyone to desire the same traditional structures of orbiting and central anchors.
It completely reframes who Dorian is. He isn't an emotionally stunted, aloof loner. He is a man with a highly evolved, fiercely specific way of existing. He just requires a partner who is equally secure in their own separate architecture.
Which is exactly why Tatjana's return works. She no longer needs to be his center because she has become her own center.
They don't need to merge into one entity. They can sit side by side in their respective sovereignty.
They reunite, as the authors put it, for more than dinner, less than forever, which is the exact right-size space for two people who understand the threshold.
More than dinner, less than forever. It proves that peace finally comes when you stop asking a river to be a lake. You just have to let the water move the way it was designed to move.
Stop demanding the vintage car be something it's not.
Exactly.
We covered incredible ground today. We started with a Belgrade locksmith who views metal locks as gentle conversations. We unpacked how his need for a decompression chamber, his directional heat, causes admiration to sour into resentment for partners who demand traditional codependency.
We went through the turn.
We did. We explored the beautiful, tragic collision of necessary versus sufficient with Lena, and ended with Tatjana's radical realization that a practice of attention is its own valid architecture. This deep dive really is an invitation to stop forcing yourself, or the people you love, into shapes they were never meant to hold.
It is. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative concept hidden in the glossary at the very end of the source material. It's a term called the locksmith's gift.
Oh, this is a fascinating concept.
The authors define the locksmith's gift as the rare ability to answer a question the other person didn't even know they were asking. It's when someone understands your internal mechanisms so perfectly that they unlock you without you having to explain yourself.
Which, honestly, sounds like the ultimate romantic ideal.
It sounds like it, yeah. But the catch is that the text notes this gift is simultaneously a profound form of love and a terrible impediment.
Wait, really? How is it an impediment?
Because when you are heard before you even speak, it completely bypasses the necessary struggle of communication. It makes you feel incredibly seen, but it also makes you feel utterly invaded.
Because there's no boundary left.
Exactly. So I want you to ponder this as you look at your own relationships. When you intimately figure someone out, when you read their silences perfectly and anticipate their needs before they voice them, are you giving them a beautiful gift or are you trespassing on their sovereignty?
Oh, wow. That is going to stick with me for a long time.
It's a heavy thought.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Parabellum of the Hearts. We hope this conversation gives you the clarity to embrace your own unnecessary doors and the courage to honor the specific architecture of your own life. And the next time you find yourself standing outside your front door fumbling for your keys, remember, it's not a stubborn obstacle keeping you out. It's just a question waiting for your gentle answer.